Hi there, this is Afro Perspectives. Trump, as part of the peace deal for the Eastern DRC, has proposed the DRC to export raw minerals for processing in Rwanda. Trump coming up with such a scheme is no surprise. It is one of the main points in the so-called Declaration of Principles signed by both the DRC and Rwanda in the presence of the Americans on April 25th, just a few weeks ago. But how will this work out in practice? Rwanda has a certain idea of how this is likely to work out in the real world. Consider this. In June of 2021, Rwanda and DRC signed a collaboration agreement. Basically, the DRC agreed that Sakima, the state-owned mining company which has numerous mining concessions in the Kivu provinces, would export raw minerals, mostly coltan, to be processed by a Rwandan entity known as DITA, which processes coltan into products that can be bought by the technology companies. The DRC, however, suspended the deal in June 2022 after Rwanda decided to reactivate the M23 and the rebel group started on its offensive and captured the border town of Bunagana. For Kagame, the DRC cannot be trusted to stick to any agreement considering its reneging on the Sakima-Dita deal. Access to the DRC's minerals is a lifeline for Kagame. Revenue from the minerals looted from the DRC make up 30% of Rwanda's budget. The Sakima-Dita deal is the template, the blueprint on which Rwanda has pinned its hopes on exploiting the minerals in eastern DRC. As what happened with President Tshisekedi shutting down the deal at short notice, Kagame wants Trump to guarantee that Rwanda has long-term access to Congo's raw minerals. So what is in it for the Americans? At the moment, companies such as Apple, Samsung, and Nikon are sourcing coltan from the giant Rubaya mine in the eastern part of the DRC and the North Kivu, to be precise. The Americans, according to Masad Boulos, Trump's advisor on African affairs, has lined up about 30 investors, all American companies. But the situation in the DRC is volatile due to the presence of a multiplicity of armed groups. To access coltan from Rubaya, the Americans want the participation of Rwanda. The DRC, on its part, insists that before it can agree to work with the Rwandans on the export of its minerals to the same Rwanda, Kagame has to withdraw his soldiers, the Rwanda Defense Forces, from territories it has occupied in the eastern part of the DRC. And the DRC also wants Kagame to end his support for the M23. The DRC's demands are not that ambitious at all. It's simply a return to the situation, the status quo before 2021, when at that point in time the M23 itself decided to regroup and start its offensive in the east. The Western powers have leverage over Rwanda. Consider this as the current state of affairs. Rwanda's budget, 70% of it to be precise, comes in the form of aid from the West. Western powers can simply freeze the flow of this help on condition that Rwanda comply with cutting off its support for the M23 and then it pulls out of the eastern DRC. In fact, this is what happened in 2012 when the M23 took over Goma. Western donors threatened to cut off funding towards Rwanda's budget. And overnight, the Rwanda disowned the M23, who ended up fleeing to Uganda. So why has this not happened? For a start, Rwanda is the West's policeman in Africa. It contributes troops to the various United Nations peacekeeping activities. Since 2020-21, It has its troops guarding French gas installations in the Cabo Delgado province of Mozambique. It has sent the Rwanda Defense Forces to the Central African Republic. Then the EU, in the so-called Global Gateway Agreement, has been pouring close to €1 billion for Rwanda to build infrastructure to process minerals from Eastern DRC. This arrangement has been in place since February of 2024. The Americans, it seems, are coming up with their own kind of arrangement to get access to DRC's minerals. Well, that's all very well, but such an arrangement, like a mining deal proposed by Trump, does not address the root problem of insecurity in the DRC. Even if one were to factor in people like Eric Prince and his mercenary outfit promising to guard the mining sites, that still leaves the various armed groups in control of vast chunks of territory. Take the case of the Lubimbe and Kanosho gold mines, both in South Kivu. Here you have the armed group known as Raia Mtomboki. Pit bosses, that is the bosses who control the mines, pay the rebels 1 gram of gold per week. At another side controlled by the Raia Mtomboki rebels, that is at the Lukoma mine. Here, small-scale miners dig for cassiterite and they are taxed 10% of what they produce. Even those who are not digging for anything, they have to pay 10% of the value of goods supplied to the mine. Once the minerals are out of the ground and now need transporting to the markets, places like Goma and Bukavu, the rebels have set up roadblocks where they charge as much as $5 per bag of ore. It's not only the rebels who are imposing taxes on small-scale miners. Even the regular Congolese army, the FARDC, gets a piece of the action. The FARDC charge the so-called effort de guerre, the effort de guerre tax, or war effort in ordinary English. And in the areas the FARDC controls, commanders have a monopoly on the selling of cigarettes, cannabis, and even beer. Even if Trump were to impose a cooperation agreement on the DRC and Rwanda, and they both work together, the various armed groups in the Eastern DRC will continue just as before. To get an idea of what is at stake for both Rwanda and the M23, consider the case of SMB, known as the Société Minière de Bisinzu. It is one of the largest processors of coltan and had its factories based in Goma. Since the beginning of February, its mines were forcibly taken over by the M23, who looted and destroyed its properties in Rubaya, where the world's largest coltan mine is found. In the so-called liberated areas, that is, areas under the M23's control, all small-scale miners are now paying taxes to the M23. Saying the small-scale miners are paying tax to the M23 might be just a polite way of describing a system where miners are now captive to the M23 and some are working at gunpoint for no wages at all. Even though SMB lost most of its mines to the M23, that did not stop the authorities in Kinshasa from putting SMB's founder, Edouard Mwangashuchu, on trial accused of working for the M23, accused of treason and spying for Rwanda. I'm not sure whether even a man like Trump heading a superpower can bring order to the chaos reigning in the Eastern DRC. If one were to say that the state is absent in Eastern DRC, that might actually be an understatement. The DRC is all but a failed state. Anyone with access to submachine guns like the AK-47 and a bunch of young men can tax whoever they like. In the Walikale territory in North Kivu, north of the Mpofi-Ruvingu-Kibua axis, rebels belonging to the armed group known as Nduma Defense of Congo Renovated, popularly known as NDCR, charge the equivalent of $1 for the so-called war effort tax to all adults in the territory it controls. Once the rebels have collected the tax, they issue a token and NDCR rebels then set up roadblocks checking for the tokens. Anyone caught without a token is jailed, or they may face a whipping in front of the public and a $10 US fine. So you can see for yourself, even if Rwanda and the M23 pull out of Eastern DRC, the security crisis remains. What President Tshisekedi needs is to build an army from scratch. The regular Congolese army, the FARDC, competes for the control of the mines and taxes the small-scale miners in much the same way as the rebels. What President Tshisekedi should be demanding as part of any peace deal is someone to come in and train a new army for him. Without a properly trained military and even a police force, President Tshisekedi can sign all the deals he can sign with any other world power he chooses, but that will not solve the security crisis in Eastern DRC. Thank you for taking time to follow this piece. If there is anything that I have got wrong, I've failed to mention, please drop your comments below. We are only a small channel and your support is highly appreciated. So please subscribe and don't forget to give me those likes. Thank you. Bye. Merci.